Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In my last video, I showed you a system for having pre-set encounters. In other words, you can set up a particular location and you can say that at this location, if the player characters get there, they're going to face a group of monsters, and the group of monsters is going to be, well, in the case of the game that I am programming, it's different types of giant mosquitoes. So I might say, well, it's 3 adult male giant mosquitoes and 2 females and 2 pupae, for example. But of course, it could be anything, whatever's relevant to the setting. And the system that I showed you works well for a game where there are a small number of types of monsters. In the game that I'm programming, there are actually only 3 different types of monsters, those 3 different types of giant mosquito that I mentioned. But you might be doing a sort of D&D style fantasy game, for example, where there might easily be 50 different types of monsters. And of course, the same is true of other settings. But a lot of sort of traditional D&D fantasy settings like to have a sort of wide variety of monsters. And the system that I showed you, if you have a large number of types of monsters, the system that I showed you isn't very good for various reasons that I'll get to. So what I'm going to show you in this video is a system that's better for that situation. It's better if you in situations where you have large numbers of types of monsters. What I've done here is I've set up an example which is meant to be five cultists and a Shoggoth, which is a monster from H.P. Lovecraft. That's obviously not relevant to the programming. This is just to make sure that it's reading the data correctly. So I'd like to spend the rest of the video showing you the code. So here we have an example of an array which I've called $mon_sta, which is a 2-dimensional array giving the name and details for all of the different types of monsters that we're going to be using. In this case, there's only 20, but you could have many, many more. The stats aren't real stats. They're just numbers that are there as an example, and in fact each one has got the same numbers. The only thing that we're actually going to be looking at in this is slot 0 of each of the sort of top level slots, which has the different names. Then we have the variable $mon_max, which is the maximum number of enemies that you can face at the start of a single encounter. Then we have $mon_num, which is the number of monsters in the current encounter, which is presumably going to be equal to or less than mon_max. Then we have NME, $NME, which is of course short for just enemy. And in the enemy array, you're probably going to want to have at least 2 details per monster: the type and probably their hit points, or whatever the equivalent is in your game, life points or stamina, or whatever the points are that show how wounded and how close to death a given monster is. You might want to have more than that, but you may find it easier to have those different stats in this array. And then if you want to have, for example, well, I want some of the cultists to have magic spells, for example, you might deal with that by, instead of dealing with that in NME, you might find it easier to deal with that by making a different type of cultist. So you might have slot 19 is cultist, and then slot 20 might be cultist priest, and then they have a different stat which says that they have extra spells or something like that. But either way, we have a for loop which goes from 1 to mon_max, and for each run through the loop, we just set the zth slot of $NME to itself be an array. In other words, we're setting up NME to be a two-dimensional array. And the only one we're going to look at in this example is NME Z1. We're going to say that slot 1 is the type of the enemy, and that's going to be a number, and that number is going to correspond to this array. So if we had 15 in that array, that would correspond to a wolf, for example. Now, that is all the same, basically, as I did in the previous video. What we're coming up to now is the thing that's different. I have an array which is $PRE_ENC, which of course stands for preset encounters or predetermined encounters. And here's how I did it in the previous video. I might have done something like this. We might have a null, or we might not bother with that, depending on whether you want to start from slot 0 or slot 1. But either way, we might have something like 432, and that might indicate, we might say that slot 1 is the adult male mosquitoes, slot 3 is the adult females, and slot 2 is the pupae. And so this sequence of numbers would mean 4 adult males, 3 adult females, 2 pupae. If we change this to 0, it would be just 3 females and 2 of the pupae. Now, that's fine if we've got 3 different types of monsters, but let's look at this situation where we've got 20. So in the encounter that we want to set up, we want to have 5 cultists, which is type 19, and 1 Shoggoth, which is type 9. It doesn't matter which order we have them in, but let's say we do the cultists... It actually does matter which order. It won't matter which order we do them in. I got ahead of myself there. It won't matter which order we do them in the way we're going to do it in this video. In the previous way, we'd have to go through like this. We'd have to go, well, there's 0 dragons, 0 kobolds, vampires, bandits, orcs, goblins, deep ones, or werewolves. So we have to go 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. There is 1 Shoggoth. That's slot 9. And then 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. There's nothing. There's 5 cultists. And there's no zombies. So immediately you can see that that's a lot of typing. And that's only 20 monsters. If we're dealing with 50, well, obviously that's, more again. 100, that's more again. Secondly, it's not very easy for me to look at that and go, oh, that's 5 cultists and 1 Shoggoth. If there's only 3, if it's just 432, it's easy enough for me to remember that and go, oh, okay, that's 4 adult males, 3 females, and 2 pupae. But I'm never going to remember 20 or more different monsters, and it's not even that easy to see that this is slot 9 and not slot 8 or slot 10. Anyway, even if I did remember what slot 9 was. Secondly, it's very easy to make a mistake. I could easily sort of miscount and have 1 fewer 0 than we needed. And now it probably won't read properly because it'll try to read slot 20 and there won't be a slot 20. But now we've moved this to slot 8 and we moved this to slot 18. So now we're dealing with werewolves and mind flayers instead. So we've completely changed the, we've changed the encounter. We've got it wrong with just a tiny little mistake. Or of course, to go the other way and add a 0, and then we're dealing with Tyrannosaurus and zombies instead of what we want. You might say, well, there's a third reason, and that's that it takes up more memory. But I don't think that's significant. The size of the actual game files is going to be so small compared to picture files and compared to audio files that we're probably going to be using in a given project, that's not the problem. The problem is just the inconvenience of typing it and the danger of making a mistake. So what do we do instead? Well, here's what we have instead. We have 19, 5, 9, 1. And that means type 19, there's 5 of them. Type 9, there's 1 of them. This is why I said order doesn't matter before, mistakenly. We could have 9, 1, 19, 5, and it would give the same results. As long as we have the type first and the number second, because if we swap them round, that won't mean 5 cultists, it will mean 19 orcs in this case. So the order doesn't matter in terms of each pair, but the order of the pairs does matter. So what's going to happen is the computer will go through this slot. It will say, okay, type 19, we want to set up 5 of them. Type 9, we want to set up 1 of them. Then it'll look at the next slot and see that there's nothing there and go, that must be the end of the encounter. We can finish. We can say that it's set up and then we can display it. So you can have fewer pairs or more pairs. I could have something else with this encounter if I could think of something else that was sort of thematically appropriate. Or I could just have one type of monster. So maybe I wanted to have a fight with a dragon. I want to set up a dragon as being a very sort of major antagonist, and I want to have like a boss fight. Then I could just have just the dragon and no helpers. All right. So I just noticed I said pre-sent, not preset. So sorry about that. That's a mistake. And then I've just got the note that says that Z, Y, and X, the usual note that I put in all of my stuff, which just says that Z, Y, and X refer to temporary variables. All right, so let's have a look at where we go next, which is encounter details. This is pretty straightforward. We set Z equals 1. That is the number of the current encounter as per this array. Well, this array only has 1 slot in it, but of course in a real version of this you'd have 10 or 20 or however many preset encounters there are. And of course in a real game this would result from the choices that the player character made. So the encounter with the dragon is in the dragon's cave, and the dragon's cave is in the middle of the forest, which is located such and such areas away from the starting town. And so the player would move around the environment, and when it got to the dragon cave, if they did, then the program would say, that's preset encounter number 3 or whatever it is, the one that's with the dragon, and it would set that to the appropriate number. We set Y to 0, which is the slot of this array that we're going to look at. It starts with 0 because, as you can see, there's no, in this case I've chosen not to have a null at the beginning, so we're not starting on slot 1, we're starting on slot 0. And then we have $mon_num equal to 0, and we've already said what that means. That is the number of monsters in a given encounter, and that's going to increase. This number starts at 0 and it's going to increase as we go through the array and look at what the pre_enc array is telling us about what monsters are there. So we look at pre_enc zy. Z is the number of the preset encounter. Y is a temporary variable which is currently 0, or like it'll start at 0 the first time we hit that page. So in this case, we've set Z to 1. So in this case, it'll look at that one there, and it'll read the value 19. If it read nothing, and it won't do that on the first time that it hits this page, if that slot is not defined, if ndef, ndef, if ndef, this means if you look in that slot and you see that it doesn't have anything in it, not the same thing as having 0. If it actually doesn't have any data, if I haven't written anything in there, then if that is the case, it knows that it's finished, and so we go to the next page, which is just displaying the enemies. But the first time we see it, it won't do that. It will read something. In this case, it will read 19. So in that case, we have a loop, which we're storing in X, and it goes from 1 to PRE_ENC Z Y plus 1. So in this case, it will read that, and it'll say, that's 5. So I need to do this 5 times. And what do I do 5 times? Well, I increment the number of monsters, and I add to the slot NME MON_NUM1, which is the slot we've said is going to store the type of the monster. I add PRE_ENC ZY. So the first time it goes through this, it will loop 5 times, and in the first slot 1 1 2 1 3 1 4 1 and 5 1 of NME, it will store the value 19. In other words, it will say enemy 1 is a cultist, because that's what 19 means. We know that from this array here. Enemy 1 is a cultist, 2 is a cultist, 3 is a cultist, 4 is a cultist, 5 is a cultist. Having done that, it will increase Y by 2, and it will include setup encounter. Well, this is setup encounter, so it'll just go back to the top of the page. And again, so Y will be 0 to start with, then it'll be 2. It'll look at slot 2, which is this one, and go, okay, is that one not defined? No, it is defined. It's got a value of 9, and it'll do the same thing. It'll go through this loop 1 time, and it'll add the value 9 to slot number 6 and none other, to indicate that there's a single Shoggoth. Then it'll set Y to 4. It'll go up to the top of the page. It'll say, is this slot not defined? Yep, this slot's not defined. Okay, that must mean we've reached the end. So now we can display. So let's look at display. Display is fairly straightforward. It's just a loop that goes from 1 to the number of monsters, which we've been incrementing. We've been incrementing that. Sorry, loaded the wrong page. We've been incrementing MON_NUM as we go. So it will now have the correct value, in this case 6. And it'll just print. Okay, so this is another nested bit of code that is sort of looks more complicated than it is. It'll look at NME Z1 and see that it has a value of, say, 19. And then it will look at MON_STA 190, and it will go, that's this text cultist, and so it will print cultist and a line break, and it will do that for all the monsters. So it will go cultist, 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 Shoggoth. Now, of course, in a real game, you would have more displayed than that. You might also have a picture. You might call a relevant picture. You might show the hit points. That's, some games tell you the enemy's hit points, some don't. Maybe sometimes that's a skill that you can gain to sort of see how you're going. You might display sort of what they're armed with, what their armor is. You know, who knows? It depends on the game. But we're doing the simplest possible thing where it just displays the text. So that is a way that is that allows you to do the same thing that we did last video, but with a lot shorter amount of text in here. It's a lot easier to type. You're a lot less likely to make mistakes. It does at least tell you, it's easier to read. I can say, well, that's type 19, that's 5 of type 19 and 1 of type 9. And I'm probably not going to memorize what type 19 and type 9 is, but I can at least go up here and say, all right, it's 5 of type 19, and I can see that 19 is cultists, and it's 1 of type 9, and that is Shoggoths. Whereas if it was a big row of zeros, and then the occasional sort of number in there, it would be very easy to make mistakes and very difficult to count, to count up and say, well, that number is in the 19th slot. It'd be easy to miscount it as 18 or 20 or whatever. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.